and I see this man with a sawed-off shotgun.
I was scared to death.
He says, I'm going to take your son. And I said, take me instead.
On a sunny Thursday afternoon, a devoted mother named Barbara returned to her Florida home, completely unaware she was stepping into a chilling nightmare. She was a brilliant copywriter, fiercely protective of her 6-year-old son and her disabled twin sister. But as she walked into the kitchen, a terrifying voice commanded her to freeze. Standing there was a ruthless intruder, armed with a sawed-off shotgun. In the next room, her twin sister was bound, gagged, and bleeding, while her little boy was cornered by pure evil. A frantic police search would soon span across multiple state lines. However, as Barbara offered her own life to save her family and was forced into a stolen car at gunpoint, her harrowing and unimaginable fight for survival had just begun. Barbara Mabee Abel was 31 years old, living a quiet life in West Palm Beach, Florida. As a fiercely dedicated single mother working as a copywriter for a local radio station, her entire world revolved around two people: her 6-year-old son, Dale, and her beloved twin sister, Beverly. Beverly lived with cerebral palsy, and following the recent tragic passing of their mother, Barbara had bravely stepped up to become the sole pillar of their household, working tirelessly to provide a safe haven for her family. The morning of Thursday, November 14th, 1974, began like any other perfectly ordinary day. Barbara prepared for a busy shift at the radio station, while little Dale got ready for school. The house was filled with its usual warmth and comforting routine. By the late afternoon, Barbara finished her work, picked up Dale, and the two of them happily returned to their peaceful home. As they stepped through the front door, Barbara cheerfully called out for her sister, shouting the nickname Bevy, fully expecting her usual happy reply. Instead, the house answered with an eerie, heavy silence. Assuming her sister was simply resting, Barbara gently instructed Dale to go look for his aunt, while she walked into the kitchen to pour a quick glass of water. As she stood by the sink, a sudden, terrifying chill violently ran down her spine. The air in the room seemed to freeze just a second before a cold, menacing voice echoed from directly behind her.
"Do not turn around, or I will shoot,"
the voice ordered. A paralyzing wave of pure dread washed over her body, driven by a terrifying mix of shock and instinct. Barbara slowly turned around. Standing right there in the middle of her own kitchen was a ruthless intruder. The shadowed figure stared at her with dead eyes, tightly gripping a sawed-off shotgun and aiming the heavy barrel directly at her chest. Little did they know, the nightmare had already begun in the next room. Suddenly, little Dale sprinted into the kitchen, his young voice trembling with pure panic as he cried out that his Aunt Bevy was bleeding. The ruthless intruder aggressively shoved Barbara down the hallway, forcing her into the bedroom. The sight that awaited her was completely soul-crushing. Her beloved twin sister was helplessly bound, tightly gagged, actively bleeding, and completely unclothed, bearing the horrifying physical evidence of a brutal, violent assault. A fierce, uncontrollable rage erupted from deep within Barbara. Ignoring the lethal weapon pointed directly at her, she screamed into the face of the monster. The cold-blooded intruder merely offered a twisted smirk, casually admitting that he had indeed attempted to violate Beverly, but ultimately failed. Callously indifferent to the agonizing pain he had just caused, the shadowed figure systematically ransacked the room, stealing every single piece of cash he could find inside the house. Then, he delivered a chilling declaration that made Barbara's heart completely stop. He announced that he was taking her precious 6-year-old boy, Dale, to use as his personal hostage on the road. In that terrifying, split-second moment, her fierce maternal instinct completely overrode her own paralyzing fear. Barbara immediately dropped to her knees, physically throwing her own body in front of her terrified child to act as a human shield. Looking directly into the eyes of pure evil, she made the ultimate, heartbreaking proposition. She desperately pleaded,
"Do not hurt them. Take me instead of the boy."
The ruthless gunman pondered for a moment before coldly agreeing to her desperate terms. He quickly forced Dale and Beverly onto the bed, tightly binding them together. He then snatched Barbara's car keys and marched her toward the front door at gunpoint, forcing her to walk away from her completely helpless family. Back inside the agonizingly quiet house, exactly 30 minutes after his brave mother was taken away by the monster, the incredibly courageous little boy began to fight back. Despite his tiny, bruised wrists actively bleeding from the painful struggle, Dale miraculously managed to untie his own harsh restraints. He quickly freed his traumatized aunt, and without wasting a single second, the brave 6-year-old sprinted out of the house and dashed straight to a neighbor's door to desperately call the police for help. I am curious, how would you feel if this happened to someone you love? Having to look your child in the eyes and leave with a monster just to keep them alive. Inside her own yellow Volkswagen, Barbara was forcefully ordered to drive far away from the familiar streets of her city. The heavy silence in the car was only broken by the frantic sound of the radio dial turning. The shadowed figure constantly tuned in to various stations, obsessively searching for any breaking news regarding the police investigation. Then, he slowly turned his head toward her. With absolutely no emotion in his voice, he casually confessed, "I have killed people." A wave of pure, paralyzing terror instantly crashed over Barbara. Every instinct in her body screamed for her to break down and cry, but she knew with terrifying certainty that if she showed any weakness, she would be his next victim. In that heart-stopping moment, Barbara made a brilliant, desperate decision to fight back using the only weapon she had left, her mind. She deployed a masterful strategy of reverse psychology. Suppressing her overwhelming dread, she began a high-stakes performance to save her own life. She started showering him with fake compliments, telling him he looked just like the famous actor Robert Redford. She forced herself to use sweet, endearing words, completely playing to his massive, fragile ego. When he proudly revealed his twisted desire to be famous, Barbara saw her opening. Using her professional skills, she promised the cold-blooded killer that she would use her experience as a copywriter to help him write a book about his life, but only if he allowed her to live. Slowly but surely, the monster took the bait, and his heavily guarded defenses began to lower. What struck me the most was Barbara's absolute genius. While staring down the barrel of a shotgun, she didn't panic. She weaponized his own ego against him. This is where the story takes a dark turn, because their destination wasn't freedom. It was room 10. After driving for miles, the shadowed figure finally ordered Barbara to pull into a desolate motel in Fort Pierce, Florida. He carefully concealed his sawed-off shotgun beneath his heavy coat, keeping the deadly weapon pressed hard against her side. He coldly instructed her to play along as they slowly approached the front desk. Under the immense, unspoken threat of instant death, Barbara was forced to check them in under the completely fabricated names of Mr. and Mrs. Joe Smith. Suppressing every single ounce of her profound disgust, she had to wrap her arm tightly around the waist of the very monster who had shattered her life, desperately convincing the unsuspecting receptionist that they were merely a happily married couple resting for the night. Once the heavy door of room 10 finally clicked shut, the terrifying reality of her situation truly set in. He violently tore the motel bedsheets into long, tight strips and forcefully tied her wrists and ankles to the heavy wooden bedposts. What followed next was a horrific ordeal of profound physical violation and devastating mental anguish. She lay there completely defenseless, enduring the unimaginable nightmare by focusing her mind entirely on the desperate hope of seeing her little boy again. Adding to the sheer terror, her captor exhibited highly erratic, deeply disturbing behavioral shifts, violently swinging between two entirely different identities, much like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. One moment, he was a raging, uncontrollable beast, screaming vicious threats and promising to end her life. The very next second, he would suddenly collapse, holding his head in his hands, crying and desperately begging for her forgiveness. Mentally shattered and physically exhausted from the relentless torment, Barbara eventually drifted into a fractured, uneasy sleep. In the depths of her profound darkness, a beautiful, comforting vision suddenly appeared. She dreamt of her recently departed mother, standing peacefully before her in a radiant white dress. Her mother leaned in close and gently whispered, "You are going to be okay. God is with you." Those simple, divine words pierced straight through the heavy despair in the room, immediately reigniting a fierce, unbreakable will to survive deep within Barbara's exhausted soul. Drop your take in the comments. Can you imagine the pure terror of being tied to a bed, completely at the mercy of a man who changes personalities by the second? On the morning of November 15th, the heavy silence in the motel room was suddenly shattered when he turned on the television. Instantly, both of their faces flashed across the screen on a national news broadcast. The ruthless captor stared at the screen, visibly thrilled and completely intoxicated by the terrifying realization that he was now a famous, highly wanted fugitive. Barbara, however, kept her head down, secretly weeping tears of pure joy. The news anchor had just officially confirmed that her brave little boy and her sister were completely safe. Later that morning, he forced her out of the room to eat breakfast at a local diner. Sitting in the small booth, Barbara desperately scanned the room, praying with all her heart that someone, anyone, would recognize her face from the television. Yet, to her crushing despair, the waitresses and patrons walked right past them without a single second glance. She sat entirely frozen, acutely aware of the deadly shotgun resting completely hidden beneath his heavy coat. After returning to the suffocating confines of room 10, the kidnapper made his first and ultimate mistake. Announcing he needed to step outside to make a phone call, he tightly bound her to the bed frame once again and walked out, letting the heavy door click shut behind him. However, in his arrogant haste, he had carelessly left the room key resting right on top of the nightstand. Moments later, he returned, violently rattling the brass doorknob. He had locked himself out. After several tense, agonizing seconds of struggling with the door, he leaned against the wood and chillingly called out to her. "When the police come, do not tell them I hurt you," he said. "I love you." Then, the sound of his footsteps quickly faded as he ran away into the daylight. Knowing this was her only chance, Barbara frantically reached for a broken piece of glass from the table. Summoning a miraculous surge of adrenaline, she aggressively sawed through the tight bedsheets until her hands were finally free. She immediately grabbed the telephone, called the front desk, and reported the terrifying crime to the police. Within minutes, law enforcement swarmed the area. Safe at last, she was handed a phone to speak with her family, hearing Dale's sweet, innocent voice softly asking, "Mommy, when are you coming home?" Completely broke her heart, but in the most beautiful way possible. And then, the chase was on. The man who held her captive was now a phantom on the run. As the massive manhunt rapidly intensified, the abandoned stolen vehicle left near Barbara's home provided investigators with the final pieces of a truly horrifying puzzle. The police officially announced the identity of the phantom who had just slipped through their fingers. His name was Paul John Knowles, a 28-year-old fugitive whom the frantic press had already dubbed the Casanova Killer. When law enforcement connected the physical evidence across multiple state lines, the terrifying scope of his crimes finally came into full, devastating view. This man was definitely not a simple burglar or a petty thief. He was a remorseless monster currently in the middle of a brutal, 4-month killing spree that stretched across the entire United States. Dedicated detectives linked him to a massive trail of absolute carnage, including the savage slaughter of the Carr family, the ruthless strangulation of vulnerable elderly citizens, and the cold-blooded executions of random hitchhikers. The police possessed concrete evidence tying him to at least 18 deceased victims, though the arrogant monster himself boldly boasted an unthinkable body count of 35. Looking back at her agonizing ordeal, a profoundly chilling reality quickly emerged. Out of all the innocent people he had violently taken, Barbara was the one and only kidnapped victim who ever survived and made it back home. Her incredible return was not merely a stroke of blind luck, it was a direct result of her extraordinary courage, her fierce devotion to her family, and her absolute mastery of reverse psychology against a highly seasoned predator. I gotta be honest with you, realizing that Barbara survived an active serial killer who had slaughtered over 18 people just days prior, this made me feel relieved. Fleeing the Florida motel in Barbara's stolen yellow Volkswagen, the desperate killer sped northward. However, his reckless escape was abruptly interrupted when a dedicated highway patrol trooper named Charles Campbell pulled him over for a routine traffic stop. Instead of surrendering to the authorities, the ruthless fugitive launched a violent counterattack, overpowering the brave officer and stripping him of his service weapon. In a terrifying escalation, he took the trooper hostage. Shortly after, he hijacked another vehicle, capturing an unsuspecting businessman named James Meyer. The cold-blooded monster drove his two innocent captives deep into the isolated woods of Pulaski County, Georgia. In a chilling display of pure evil, he tied both helpless men to a thick tree and shot them dead. The shocking abduction of a uniformed officer instantly triggered an unprecedented, massive law enforcement manhunt. The police mobilized every single available resource, filling the skies with roaring helicopters, deploying fierce tracking dogs, and establishing heavy barricades across the region. With the massive net rapidly closing in, the panicked fugitive violently crashed his stolen vehicle into a massive tree. Abandoning the smoking wreckage, he sprinted on foot into the dense, unforgiving forest. A frantic, chaotic chase ensued, culminating in a fierce gun battle through the thick brush. During the intense exchange of gunfire with the pursuing deputies, the fleeing killer was struck by a bullet directly in the leg. Bleeding, limping, and completely exhausted, the notorious monster desperately tried to hide among the shadows. Yet, his bloody reign of terror was finally brought to a sudden halt by a completely unexpected hero. A courageous veteran, who was simply out hunting in those very woods, crossed paths with the dangerous fugitive. Raising his own firearm, the veteran fearlessly held the wounded killer at bay, completely subduing the vicious monster, until a massive swarm of police officers rushed in and finally locked him in heavy iron shackles. No one could have predicted what happened next, because Paul John Knowles had one last trick up his sleeve. On December 18, 1974, the final chapter of this terrifying nightmare was written. Sheriff Earl Lee and Special Agent Ronnie Angel from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation escorted the captured fugitive in their patrol car. They were driving down the highway, taking him to locate the stolen firearm he had discarded in the woods. Despite wearing heavy metal handcuffs, the cunning monster had secretly hidden a small metal paperclip on his person. In a sudden, desperate move, he used the tiny wire to successfully pick his locks. He lunged forward over the front seat, violently grabbed Sheriff Lee's revolver, and attempted to fire the weapon right through the holster. However, justice was swift and absolute. Special Agent Ronnie Angel did not hesitate for a single second. He immediately drew his own firearm and fired 3 consecutive bullets directly into the chest of Paul John Knowles. The notorious 28-year-old serial killer died instantly, right there in the moving vehicle. There would be no lengthy trials, no drawn-out appeals, and no more innocent victims. His twisted reign of terror was permanently ended in the back seat of a police cruiser. Does this make your blood boil too? Trying to murder a cop and escape while sitting in the back seat of a squad car. This part really makes my heart full. Barbara absolutely refused to let the dark ghost of her captor ruin the rest of her precious life. She consciously made the powerful choice to live every single day as a triumphant survivor rather than a broken victim. She eventually found true peace, marrying the absolute love of her life, a wonderful man named Jim. They shared 43 beautiful years of marriage together. She even courageously battled and defeated breast cancer. Decades later, she published a highly inspiring autobiography, detailing her incredible fight to save her family and hoping to bring a guiding light to others facing unimaginable darkness. Finally, after months of bloodshed, absolute justice was served in the back of that police car, and a courageous mother could begin to heal. What do you guys think? Does this brutal but fitting ending bring you any sense of relief? I will keep digging if there is more to uncover. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. I truly appreciate your amazing support. If you enjoyed this content, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Your comments always inspire me to create better stories. Stay safe, and I will see you all next time.